I hope that by the time we're finished in 25 minutes' time, your heart is stirred. I do hope that. And you're glad that we've kicked off the new year with this rousing ancient psalm. It's the second of our summer psalms. How often do you encounter majesty? The kind of majesty that stops you in your tracks and forces you to gaze in wonder as your heart drinks in that sense of sheer magnificence. My little hunch is, for most of us, if only we would stop and take notice a little more often. For me, it can be, for instance, cresting a mountain pass and veering a little left, and there before me is this range of snow-capped peaks. Or it can be the thwack of leather on willow in a full-blooded cover drive. For you, maybe a fragrance. Or maybe a full orchestra with brass blazing. Maybe it's the sight of a lone red gum against the bluest of blue skies. Or an eagle soaring and hovering on the breeze. Maybe that's what catches your heart. Perhaps it happens sometimes in your dreams. This is Cleopatra of Egypt describing her dreams of Antony as imagined by William Shakespeare. His legs bestrid the ocean. Realms and islands were as plates dropped from his pocket. You'll see why in a few moments, I hope, why I went to Shakespeare there. True majesty has that sense of loftiness and grandeur. It calls for appreciation and respect and maybe even submission, even as our hearts are refilled with wonder. If you'd been there in 1953 at the Queen's coronation, what grand titles would you have heard? Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, Ireland, and the British dominions beyond the seas, Queen, defender of the faith. And then, when it was all over, how should you address her? She's no longer Your Royal Highness. She's now Your Majesty. Now, all of these, the mountain range, the cover drive, the Queen, they're mere inklings of true, deep, eternal majesty. As we launch into 2021, Psalm 97 reopens our eyes to the reality. Verse 1, the Lord reigns. And you can say it as simply as that. No qualifications necessary. The Lord reigns. Let the earth be glad. Let the distant shores rejoice. And this opening verse is like the propeller that drives the whole psalm along. Though more than that, I would suggest that verse 1 is actually the central theme of all the psalms. The Lord is king, and not just in Israel. The Lord is king of all the earth. Therefore, let all the earth rejoice. He is matchless, and he rules in majesty. Verse 1 again, the Lord reigns. Let the earth be glad. Let the distant shores rejoice. And now we're given, in verses 2 to 6, a description both of his transcendent splendour, but interwoven at the same time, there's descriptions of his character and the perfections of his character. Verse 2 starts in the heavenly throne room itself, and then as we move through these verses, we fan out. I'll read from verse 2. Clouds and thick darkness surround him. Clearly this is about his splendour. But now his character. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. Splendour, fire goes before him and consumes his foes on every side. His lightning lights up the world. The earth sees and trembles. The mountains melt like wax before the Lord of all the earth. Character. The heavens proclaim his righteousness, and all the people see his glory. Now, this description is meant to remind us of Mount Sinai in those heady days when God first addressed his ancient people. They heard his voice audibly, and they witnessed these spine-tingling phenomena. And we read, there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. And the narrative continues, Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace. The whole mountain trembled violently, and the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. What they were discovering, and what I would say Psalm 97 reopens our eyes to, is that this God is intimidatingly other. He is so much more than we are. He's not at all like just another one of us. He is, well, the creator. He's the creator of all that is. No wonder, verse 5, solid mountains melt. No wonder, verse 3, even great foes are consumed. The psalm says, do not treat this God casually. This God is formidable. He reigns in majesty. Now, of course, this could be bad news. It could be seriously scary news. Because if he has absolute power, what if he's a tyrant? Or a despot? Or a monster? That's why it's so important that woven into this description of his splendour, we're also told of some of the perfections of his character. Character and regal splendour interwoven. And I think as you hear of his character, it only heightens the sense of majesty. So verse 2, righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. Verse 6, the heavens proclaim his righteousness, and all the people see his glory. Verse 8, Zion hears and rejoices, and the villages of Judah are glad because of your judgments, O Lord. For you, O Lord, are the most high over all the earth. You are exalted far above all gods. The psalmist is rejoicing, saying, you are the high and lofty one who inhabits eternity. O Lord, you reign with supreme power and goodness and justice and might. In the old story, and you must have heard this part of the story somewhere before, surely, if you haven't read it yourself. When Peter and Susan and Edmund and Lucy first hear about Aslan the king, and they learn that Aslan is a lion. And not just a lion, but the lion. The great lion. At that point, quaking, what's the question? Is he safe? Is he safe? Mr. Beaver's answer, safe? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe. But he's good. He's the king, I tell you. And what they learn is that all Narnia is yearning for the day when Aslan will reign unopposed, with goodness and justice. And all true Narnians hold in their hearts this old rhyme, wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight. At the sound of his roar, sorrows will be no more. And I would say in Psalm 97, God's ancient people carry exactly this same kind of solid hope, yearning for the day when The earth, the whole earth, will behold the glory and majesty of the living and true God, and his people will rejoice at his justice, and his enemies will cower in the majesty of his presence. And at last, all will be well. All will be well. At last. Verse 1. The Lord reigns. The Lord reigns. Let the earth be glad. Let the distant shores rejoice. Now, why did I choose to launch into this new year with this psalm? It's because I thought you needed a profound reminder. And what made me think that you need the profound reminder? It's because I knew I needed the profound reminder. And the reminder is, there is none other like our God. There is none other like our God. No state or federal parliament or global corporation or cluster of cases or pool of experts or movement of ideas or spiritual power can possibly topple his supreme majesty. The tides of history and of culture cannot turn without his royal permission. The disruption of a pandemic is like a single piece of a giant jigsaw puzzle. And you imagine you're just sitting on the little jigsaw puzzle piece. You don't have the box over in the corner showing you the whole picture. You can't possibly tell what the whole picture looks like. Only he can see that. You're just stuck on the current puzzle piece. Imagine trying to put together that puzzle without looking at the box. However things might appear, verse 1 assures us, the Lord reigns. This is the present and future reality. Not only is he intimidatingly other, but having him as king is wonderful. I thought you needed this profound reminder. And I knew you needed it because I knew I needed it. There is none other like our God. Furthermore, because he reigns, he is not surprised by the twists and turns of history. It's not like we've arrived in 2021 and God is, hang on, how did that happen? None of the fears or wrestlings or wearinesses of 2020 were ever beyond his sovereignty. None of the circumstances in which we found ourselves could possibly happen without his royal permission. And the truth is that you and I have no clue about the contest of wills in the heavenly realms. I say that thinking about how clueless Job was as to what's the source of his inexplicable suffering. He had zero idea. He was totally clueless. What are the evil purposes behind his suffering? What are the divine purposes behind his suffering? What's going on in that clash of wills in the heavenly realm? He has no clue. The truth is, you and I have no idea about the contest of wills playing out in the heavenly realms right now. And also, we have no idea as to how fearsome some possible alternative timeline might have been. But know this, God is not surprised. There is none like him. He reigns, and because he reigns, none of those twists and turns of history ever surprises him. Do you see? Psalm 97 reopens our eyes to the reality that our hearts were made to gaze upon and glory in. The Lord is King. He reigns in matchless majesty. Let the earth rejoice. Now, some 40 years after the cross and the tomb and the empty tomb, Peter, the apostle, wrote these words. We did not follow cleverly invented stories when we told you about the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For he received honour and glory from God the Father when the voice came to him from the majestic glory, saying, "This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased." And Peter goes on, we ourselves heard this voice that came from heaven when we were with him on the sacred mountain. Peter is remembering the breathtaking power and splendour and goodness of Jesus, his friend, Jesus, his Saviour. He's especially thinking of that day up the mountain when thick cloud descended on them and momentarily Jesus gleamed with his own authentic splendour, brilliant and terrifying. And what they were discovering was everything that they knew about God from what they called the Bible, we call the Old Testament, everything they knew about God was true of Jesus. So that they can even, in that first generation, go so far, how does John put it? We beheld his glory. And what's ascribed to God, he says, we saw it all encapsulated in God the Son. And then the more they watched him teach and pray and love and heal and forgive, then die and rise, yes, increasingly they found him intimidatingly other, and yet also compellingly majestic. Is it any wonder that he is now exalted to the highest place and given the name that is above every name? This is the present and future reality that our hearts were made to gaze upon and glory in. The Lord reigns. Let the earth rejoice. So how should we set into this year? I'm now looking at verses 10, 11 and 12. Where should our pilgrimage carry us? Love what he loves, hate what he hates, trust that he personally guards the lives of his faithful ones, and rejoice. Rejoice in him. Now, hate what he hates. What does God hate? Verse 10, he hates evil. Or we can go back to verse 7. What does God hate? Misdirected worship. I think actually verse 7 is very interesting because you may read verse 7, all who worship images are put to shame, and think, well, yes, that is kind of silly and maybe even shameful to worship images. We're too sophisticated for all that, aren't we? Take note, worshipping images includes the deep, deep temptation to worship the most incredible of creatures, the ones tailor-made in the image of God, ourselves. Worshipping images includes self-worship. Now, what might it look like if you're going to slide into self-worship? I think you need to examine your comforts and your pursuits. You need to examine what are the things that you pursue at all costs, such as comfort or pleasure or rights or self-expression or security. What are the things that you pursue at all costs? And could it be that those things are actually sliding into self-worship? The problem, the double-edged problem with self-worship is, on one hand, obviously, self-worship treats, any misdirected worship treats God as less than God, but also misdirected worship, especially self-worship, actually diminishes the self as well. Verse 7, all who worship images are put to shame. Those who boast in idols, and even all the gods of the nations are told, worship him. What does God love? Well, verse 10, faithfulness. Verse 11, righteousness. Verse 12, true worship. And you know, true worship is so good for us. True worship is good for us in part because whatever we worship, that's what we become like. Have you thought of it that way? Whatever we worship, that's what we become like. That's why misdirected worship diminishes us. True worship grows us and ascribes to God the praise that is due to him. Love what he loves, hate what he hates. This is how I intend fully to set into this year. Love what he loves, hate what he hates, and then I love it in verse 10. Trust that God, our majestic King, personally guards his faithful ones. Because he reigns, we can press on with confidence and joy. Again, because he reigns, we can press on with confidence and joy. Our trials are still real trials, but they're not pointless. Our fears are still real fears, but we are not mere pawns in a hostile society or an uncaring universe. We are pilgrims, humble pilgrims on a journey. We cannot imagine all the twists and turns ahead, but we do know the game plan, and we do know the final outcome, and because we know the game plan and the final outcome, we are assured that our humble everyday lives genuinely are Lego pieces in God's sovereign purposes. In life and death, I belong to him. In life and death, I belong to him, body and soul. And so whatever happens, resolved, love what he loves. Resolved, hate what he hates. Resolved, trust that he personally guards his faithful ones. And resolved, rejoice in the Lord. I hope you can spot why we ended last year and started this year with that psalm and this psalm. Psalm 23, the Lord is near. He's my shepherd. Psalm 97, He's the King, I tell you, and He reigns in matchless majesty. I'll read the end of the psalm. Let those who love the Lord hate evil, for He guards the lives of His faithful ones and delivers them from the hand of the wicked. Light is shed upon the righteous and joy on the upright in heart. Rejoice in the Lord, you who are righteous, and praise His holy name. Brothers and sisters, the Lord reigns. Let the earth rejoice.